Hey, I'm Robert Taylor with American Classic Heritage. We got a special edition for you today, and we're going to take back this old A model in the garage. We're going to pull the motor out, have it rebuilt, and we'll put it back together and put it back in this old car and hope we can drive it a lot more miles so any people can enjoy it for many years to come. Everybody, Robert Taylor again here with American Classic Heritage. We got a special show going on for you here tonight because we want to show you this Model A Ford under restoration. You know, you see a lot of the cars already fixed and ready to go, but this one not quite arrived yet. So this is a shade tree operation here. We already have the motor out and we're going to get it restored and we'll be putting the motor back in. And so we thought maybe y'all would enjoy seeing the one with it, the guts of the Model A, so to speak. So we already have the motor out of it, and we're going to show y'all how it looks without a motor. And these restorations sometimes take a long time. A Model A Ford, of course, is one of the easier ones to work on mostly because the parts are available. You can come up with most all the parts you need. If you're mechanically inclined a little bit, you can do it yourself, and that's where the real fun and enjoyment comes in restoring one with your own hands. Well, in this car is, just to give you an idea how some of these cars are found. Most of them is in a garage somewhere or underneath of something, and they've been there for years and years before people are able to get them out and restore them like you see them today with the car shows and stuff. But all of them's got a history, and majority of them come from a basket case, and they've been recreated. And this car is no different, it's the same. Now we got the motor out because it was needing repair, and we were having the motor rebuilt, and then when we put it back in and everything, and then we will go. I was going to show you some of the inner parts of it as we go along here. Now the 1928 Model A was kind of special as compared to the rest of the Model A's. You might notice this motor support. It's part of the frame, and it doesn't have any rubber or anything. It bolts directly to the frame. And that's in 29, they done away with that and put a different motor support there. But this one is solid as a dollar there. It will not move. So the car, if it vibrates, you will feel a little vibration and this here is the rear motor support. We have two, one on either side. So in there again, it's metal to metal with no absorbing of the motor at all. So if it vibrates, you will find a little vibration. And of course the steering sector here, as you can see. And then of course the bell housing stays in the car with the transmission on the other end of it. And this is your throw-out bearing, which you mash to change gears. It's 3-speed transmission, and the clutch would be going on right here. Of course, it does have a 3-speed transmission. And then, of course, we've got the coil, and the other, this is your gas, where your gas comes out. This is a gas filter, and it goes from here to the carburetor. So once we get it in and we can get this all lined up, we put that together, and then we lower it down to where it will go into these motor supports. And like right here now, this line sticking out, your clutch would go on that, and then throw-out bearing would reach the pressure plate and release the clutch so you can shift the gears. But them splines has got to line up, and that's kind of ticklish to do when you can't see it. and you're trying to put the motor in. And so it's just a kind of a, got to have patience and just stick with it to get it in there, because it doesn't have much room to do any wobbling or anything. But once you get it lined up and all it goes together and pretty decent, then you lower it down into the motor supports, and then here you go. You put the stuff on it. And the main reason we pulled this motor out was because of this head gasket. You might can see right here where the part of the head gasket is blown, is what you call a blown head gasket. So these two cylinders was not firing because the air could escape one cylinder to the other. So this was the main culprit, the reason we pulled the motor out, and then when we put it back, we hope that that won't ever happen again. But that happens more often than not on a blowed head gasket right between the two cylinders. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of room there for it to go. But anyway, that was the reason we had to pull it out and redo the motor. It needed redoing anyway because it got where it was taking a lot of oil and just needed some help. So we trying to do that. Here's some of the parts we've taken off of this old 28 Model A Ford, and this being the exhaust and the intake manifold. They bolt together, so they come off in one piece. And so that's that one. And then, of course, this is a radiator shroud that goes around the radiator, and the fan goes on there. And then the 28s, a lot of them had the shroud on the radiator to make it draw a little more air through the radiator in an attempt to keep it cool. And of course, they've done a good job on that. Then, of course, we got the headlights on the headlight bar. I've got them laying down here kind of in not a real good position, but maybe you can see it. And the floorboard, it's one section of the floorboard, and this is the other section of the floorboard. And this here is what they call a stone guard that goes in front of your radiator to protect you from hitting following a car that's on a dirt gravel road, kicking up stones and hitting your radiator. As your radiator just sticks right out, without that on it, it would hit the radiator and might damage the radiator. And of course, on the headlight bar, you have the horn. And these old cars without a horn is not a good thing. So we like the horn, we like the chance to blow them. And the ooga ooga, we'll get that thing on here and get it blowing, or we won't be able to drive the car without a good horn. Speaking of the horn here, one day, this is my daughter's car over in Alabama, and she called me and we were getting ready to go on a trip, and she said she wasn't going to be able to go. And I said, what is wrong? The car won't crank? And she said, no, the car crank, but the horn won't blow. So the horn's a very important item on these old cars, because everybody likes to hear it and we like to blow them. So if the horn don't blow, you just don't go. Now this is a good shot here of the radiator. I got it cleaned up a little bit and we've painted it, so when we do put it on, you see this part here will be showing, and the stone guard will protect that part. Now this is the old radiator shell that come off of it. And you can see it's pretty well used up and it's rusty and all down in here and everything. So we're going to replace that with a brand new one. And like I say, with these Model A Fords, you're real fortunate there's enough of them around that they can reproduce these items. Now, I'll show you the new radiator shell. And here's our brand new radiator shell we'll put on this radiator when we get it fixed. And you see how nice that's going to look. And with the stone guard on front of it, it'll protect this part of the radiator. But see, we were able to buy the new radiator shell, and also when we do get it back together, it'll look like it did back when Henry made it 83 years ago or so. So we're real fortunate that you can buy most anything you need for a Model A Ford now, because they're all reproduction and there's enough of them around that people can reproduce them and make a profit at it. Well, we have this car jacked up. We've got these car jacks under it on both sides to hold it up, of course. And you got to remember now, these cars have been around and stored in the old garages and in fields and whatever for years and years before us late model people got them out and restoring them. So they need, the front end will have to be rebuilt, You would need new kingpins and bushings. You need new brake shoes. You need all new parts that you can get for one when you're restoring it. This car is not completely down, so the front end is in pretty good shape. A fella was restoring it, and he got sick and died before he was able to finish it. So don't know exactly what he did or didn't do to it, so we're just finding out as we use the car. And of course, once you do one for yourself, you know where you're at. It's got new this, new that, and it goes a big help to you driving it down the road, because they will need maintenance from time to time. They're not a trouble-free car as a lot of cars are today, where if you got 40,000 miles out of a brand new one, you were doing really, really good. Now they guarantee them for 100,000 miles. So a lot of difference in the making of the automobiles back in the old days. And there again, a lot of these cars was just stored somewhere, and they didn't just park them because they was tired of driving it. They parked it because it was wore out. And chances are good, they're very, very few cars just sitting there ready to crank up and go. You can count on that. Well, here's some of the parts that come off of that old Model A, and as you can tell, this here is the starter. I put a new starter switch on it. This is the old starter switch. It didn't want to work too well, so we put a new one on. So we're hoping it'll be ready to go when we get to it. And of course, this is the fan, and the water pump is all in one piece. This is a 4-bladed fan. Now, a lot of the Model A's have 2-bladed fans later, but this is a 28, first year for them, so they improved them a little bit more. Of course, so you can't beat a 4-bladed fan. They just thought that may take some of the horsepower away from it. And so we got that ready to go. Part here goes into your head, on the head of the car, and as it turns, this propeller moves the water around on the inside. This is the only water pump it has. Runs right off of the fan belt here. This is inside the head, and that propeller moves the water around as it turns. And over here, we got this accelerator, part of the accelerator mechanism, and then of course the water outlet goes on top of the head. And this fan belt, I wanted to show you that. It's how worn out it is. See, it's worn bad time around there, so we'll be putting on a new fan belt, and so it maybe won't give us any trouble anytime soon. So this is just some of the parts. This being the distributor. Distributor goes right down through the head, right down to the oil pump, and runs off of the camshaft with your points and condenser and all in the distributor. And the lever hooks on this, and that moves back and forth to advance your timing and all that you may be familiar with, you may not. But everything on the Model A is manual, nothing automatic. So this distributor goes right in, it doesn't move, so you have to time it with this here. You have to loosen up and move that cam to time it. The radiator, the distributor does not move, so it's still. So you have to move the cam. So we have to work on those points quite regular, because this goes right in the head of the car, and it's hot. It gets real hot, and these condensers don't like that heat. But it's a simple thing when you learn how to do it. So we have to work on those points and stuff on a regular basis. And this is your inlet water, where your top water hose would go on. This goes on top of your head. After you get the head on, you put this on. This is head bolts here. So you would put this on, and the water goes in here, down through the head, and down through the block, and out the bottom, back into the radiator, and then here we go. It's just a circulation. The water pump don't work except in the head. It goes in the head and keeps the water moving. And this little piece here is accelerator. It goes on the back of the engine, and when you mash the accelerator, it works the carburetor. It's foot operated. This part will be inside your car, where your foot will go on that, and it mashes it down, and in turn goes to the carburetor and accelerates the car. So this is a very important item and but this part would end up in the car, and your foot, we have a round goes on the end of that, and you know, for your foot to rest on. But this is the part of the accelerator mechanism. Now this is a starter for the Model A Ford, and it's a manual starter. This is right here is where it makes contact. So this little plate here will go right on top, and when you mash this with your foot from the inside, this comes down, makes contact with this, and then starts the starter. You take your foot off, it goes back like it is now. So it's manual starter, but you mash this with your foot, it makes contact here, and the starter will start turning.
are your angels.
Hello everybody, Robert Taylor here again with American Classic Heritage. We're showing you the this 28 Model A Ford of the special edition that we're going to show you how we put a motor in these old cars. This is a 28 Model A Ford, and the motor we took out and had it rebuilt. It's been rebored and got new pistons, and it's got new valves that work on this new unleaded gasoline that we have these days. So that'll be an improvement. And of course it was rebabbited and it's line reamed and bored. Then stuff like that, it has to be done at a machine shop. So we sent it out to a fellow that does that, and he's done a good job on it, I'm sure, and we'll get it to going, and we're going to show you as we go exactly how we put it back together, and maybe you can even see the thing drove out of this garage here for too long. It's important, you know, a lot of times when you see these cars all put together, spit and shining and all, it's really hard to realize the history of these cars. You'd be surprised on where they all come from and the condition that they are when people start restoring them. I've seen many cases where you'd have to buy 2 or 3 cars to take parts off one and put on another one to end up with a solid car. So it's not a overnight deal, and you really got to be dedicated and really want to do it to make it happen. It's just that kind of thing, and you got to love the work and enjoy doing it. And it's pretty much almost bring them back to life, so to speak, because if it wasn't for people that would take an interest in them and work on them like that, they would be long gone. Wouldn't be nothing but a pile of rust, and we couldn't enjoy them, seeing them running up and down the road today and at the car shows and stuff like that. So the people that do the work are a special breed, and they're really important to the history of our country and the automobile.
Well, as you can see, the motor in the car now, you can't possibly know how aggravating it was to put in. And then, of course, getting it out is also a problem. Well, you can plainly see we have to take the headlights off, we have to take the radiator off, we have to take all that off to get it out. And it doesn't have any of the motor supports is metal to metal. It has no rubber or anything it gives at all. So it's a tight fit. And it's you got to have patience, and a little bit of know-how goes a long way, but you certainly got to have patience to make it work. And you know, with a couple of men and knows anything much at all, you can get it out in probably 2 or 3 hours. And putting it back in may take a little bit longer. And that's just, then of course you've got to put all the accessories on. It'll take at least 4 hours, maybe 5, to get the radiator and all that back on it and get it to where we, you know, ready to see if it'll run. Well, now, right here you can get an idea of how tight this thing fits. This is part of the engine. This is your motor support. No room in there for error. It's just at least bit of clearance in there to stick that in there. So it gets really aggravating, and on both sides it's just like that. So it's got to be exactly lined up or it will not go. And it's just kind of a nerve-wracking thing to get it in there. And but we was able to do that with my good help. And now if you can shoot down front here, this is the other motor support right here. You see it both metal to metal, so there's no giving, no way to make it do anything but just go in there. And if the car's been wrecked or this stuff is bent in any way, well, then you got yourself a problem. So it's just a unique situation, and everything has got to be right to make it go in there. Now this, like we talked about, this is a 1928. It has a different motor support in the front than the 29s and all the rest of the Model A's. But this one's part of the frame. As you can see, it don't have any way to give any. So when you get it in there, it just goes down, just does clear the frame on both sides. So it's got to be a real tight fit for it to go in there, because there's no movement of the frame or the motor, either one. So they have to be lined up exactly. And this is unique for a 28. Now 29's a little different setup and not near as critical as lining up as this one is. Well, actual time, we put it in about an hour and a half once we got completely ready to just put it in. And it went together especially good as today. It went, I mean, yesterday when we put it together, it went together pretty good. And we had a little bit of aggravation lining these holes up, like I say, in the back motor support. A little aggravation with that, but we finally was able to get it, because if the hole don't line up exactly, you will never get the boat started. Now this is your gas filter, and the gas line will come on here and go down to the carburetor, which will be right in this area. This rod here that you're seeing actually goes down, and from the inside of the car, you can choke your motor, or you can adjust, you twist it and you adjust your carburetor from the inside of the car. Now it's not unusual to have to adjust the carburetor. You have one adjustment for high speed and low speed, all the same. So sometimes if you're running slow, you may have to adjust it from the inside of the car. Not a big deal. There's a knob there to turn, and this rod will twist, and you can turn it one way or another. Now if you get it running pretty good, most people just leave that alone, and it may not run as good as it could. But if you want to adjust it, you can do that, and that's also the choke. You pull it, and it chokes it, and you most always, it's a downdraft carburetor, so you most have to choke it most every time you crank it, especially if it's cold. And if it's warmed up and you've been running it, you may not have to choke it. But being the carburetor lower than the rest of the motor, it has to suck the gas up, so it needs plenty of gas to do that. So it's just one of those things that you have to choke it to make it crank real easy. Now this right here is the gas tank, and so it holds 10 gallons of gas. This whole part here is the gas tank. Now that's we talked about earlier about parts you can buy. That's one thing you cannot buy, is this part, gas tank. So, and you put gas in right here, and of course the gas runs downhill, no fuel pump, just gas higher than the carburetor. Gas runs downhill, and it works real good. Now, of course, you don't have any pressure, so if you have a little restriction in the line, well, naturally it stops the flow pretty easy. This being a filter, water or what will go in the bottom of this and settle in here. Gas will go on, so you loosen it right here and you drain this, and if you got any foreign objects, it'll drain out. It'll drain out, and then of course shut it off like it is now, and goes. Now see, that's solid cast iron, and later on they made them glass, but right this particular car was cast iron, and that's your gas filter, as you would call it these days. And the carburetor that we'll be showing you later goes down way down here, and the carburetor is made out of cast iron, Zenith carburetor. And they've been around a long, long time, and they're real simple operation. It's not real complicated like you might think of being complicated, and a lot of carburetors are, but they are pretty simple, and they give very little trouble. They want to leak sometimes more than any other reason, any other problem. But you have a cutoff on the inside to cut the gas off before it gets to the filter. So if it does leak at the carburetor, which is not unusual because it's got constant pressure, if it's sitting in your garage for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, we'll see it's got the same pressure with your gas being higher. So if it's going to leak, it will. It's not like a car but when you cut it off and the fuel pump quits pumping, it's not under pressure anymore. This has got the same pressure where it's going down the road or sitting still. So it will leak at the carburetor from time to time. And most people will cut them off on the inside when they're going to park the car overnight or longer. Well, if you might notice now, we've got, like I was telling you, in this motor, we got brand new pistons. It's been bored out 60 thousandths over, and so that'll give it a little bit more power. A Model A is pretty thick. You can bore them out to 80 thousandths over, where a lot of cars, new cars, they don't have quite that thickness. It's also got new cadmium plated valves. Now that enables us to use the non-leaded gas. That this car was not designed back when it was built. You had leaded gas, and the leaded gas had a lot to do with your valves.
And so now with these new set of valves, the non-leaded gas won't hurt a thing. So that's not a problem for us when we change the valves. And this is just a basic motor. We don't have it all put together yet. We'll be putting on the intake manifold, and the exhaust will be on this side. And over there, the starter will go, and then the water jackets and stuff like that. And the fan and the water pump is actually in the head, and we'll put the head on shortly. And then we can put the fan on it, and of course the fan belt and the generator, stuff like that. But right now we're just showing you just a real basic engine, and we'll be putting on all the accessories as time goes on.
Now over on this side will be where the exhaust and the intake manifold go. These big holes here is where the exhaust comes out and the intake goes in. Of course the gas goes in one and it fires on the cylinder and comes out the exhaust, goes down through the muffler and out the tailpipe. But right now it's just open across here. We'll be putting on the intake and the exhaust manifold. They go side by side and they bolt on with the same bolts. Just 4 bolts holds it on there. Of course, you'll have a gasket that goes on there to make sure you don't have a air leak. But it's a pretty simple operation. You suck the gas in here, and this valve will open. It comes in, goes in there, and the piston comes up. The valve will close, and it'll fire and drive the piston down. And that's what gets it going. Just fire, fire, fire. Every time that piston comes up, sucks the gas in, has an explosion, and blows it down. And that's just how the internal engine works. Now this wire that's hanging down here, this goes into the distributor, and that just really comes from your ignition. That'll be, we'll put that into the distributor. That'll put the fire in there so the points will work and tell the distributor when to fire each cylinder that's in order. Of course, it has to be in order to make it work as it should, and it will be when we get it running. But this is just a wire that actually screws into the distributor. That distributor fits right on top of the car. Actually goes down in this hole right here and goes down to the oil pump. And it turns it, as the motor turns, it turns the rotary button in the distributor. Well, in thinking about this particular motor here, now we pulled the motor out a little bit in January of this year, and we took it to Robert Carden, and he fixed it. It took him about 2 months to get it fixed and get it back to me. He had some other stuff going on. It normally wouldn't take but a month or 6 weeks to get it done, but it took a little longer. But so we was anxious to get it, so the spring will be here for long, and we want to get it running and all that so we can drive it. But as a rule, you can have them rebuilt within reason with us 6 weeks. It takes about 6 weeks because the babbitt and stuff has to be poured. And really, it's you can't pour babbitt, I understand, if the weather has a lot to do with the babbitt and how it dries and stuff. So it's a little complicated, and you got to have someone that knows for sure what they're doing. And it's just some things you can do yourself, but there's some things you can't, and that's one of them. When they rebuild the motor, you need to let a professional do it because it needs that. Now, of course, like we've said in the past, Model A Ford, there's lots and lots of parts made for them that you can buy today. They make them, and such as this car's got new pistons in it, it's got new rings in it, it's got new valves in it, it's got new everything it needs to be inside the motor, new. And you can buy lots and lots of stuff for Model A Ford. There's several companies around that got big, thick catalogs, and there's hardly anything that you cannot buy. But you cannot buy the block, the main block. You can't buy that, and because of the expense, I'm sure. But you can buy all what we call the accessories, all the parts that hook onto the block. You pretty much can buy. And of course, there's a lot of motors around because the car would get destroyed. but the motor being of iron and cast iron and stuff, it would survive a lot longer than the actual car would, really. And a lot of people would save them through the years, put it back in the corner, and there's a lot of motors around, more motors than there are automobiles. But that sometimes they get frozen. Back in the days, they didn't use antifreeze much and didn't have the money to buy antifreeze, so had a lot of water problems because of the freezing of the motor and stuff like that. So they have a way to test that with a magnaflux to make sure there's no cracks in the motor when they rebuilt it. And Robert Carden rebuilt this one, and he checked it to make sure there's not something like that has occurred. Of course, you never know the history of the motor, and a lot of times, so you don't know where it's been. I've heard of people digging them up out in the yard where people buried them and stuff like that. So you just never really know what it's been through to get rebuilt. So there's ways to do it, but there's so many parts available for Model A. It's just almost anything you need, you can get.
We've got it all together now. The only thing we do not have is the radiator, and we will get it shortly, and we'll put it on, and maybe we can crank this car. But there's several unique parts about it that I wanted to show you and explain to you as we go along, so I'll do that. Well, and I'm going to show you the parts that we've added to this 28 Model A. And of course, here is the exhaust and the intake manifold, and the carburetor is hooked onto the intake, of course, and then we have the line that comes up and feeds the carburetor. It's not a fuel pump or anything like that. It just runs downhill, and this is a downdraft carburetor because it's lower than the intake. And you might notice this distributor is a unique thing. It sits right in the middle of the motor, and then of course the straps, the spark plug wires are solid. They're not a wire at all. It's just a strap of brass strap. So you have no trouble. That's one of the trouble-free things about a Model A is them straps. They don't give any trouble. But the distributor mounting in the middle of it and the heat coming from the exhaust manifold, they do get awful warm. And the condensers give a lot of trouble when they get hot. You have to replace the condenser pretty regular on a Model A because of the heat. And they make a little heat shield you can buy and put under there to kind of cut out some of that heat. But that's the problem. Now, of course, the wire going from the coil to the distributor is just a regular ignition wire. It's like on a modern car. But we put a new head gasket and all that on it, and we've torqued the head down 55 pounds. So we think we're ready to go with that. And of course, this is the fan, cooling fan, and the water pump is inside the head. As the fan turns, it turns the water pump and turns the water. This is where this is top neck will go to the radiator, and as the fan turns, like I say, it will push the water through the motor and on out into the radiator. And of course, the transmission you can't see, but it's on the inside, and it's just a 3-speed transmission, 3 forward, 1 reverse. So it's we pretty much ready to go. When we get the radiator on the front of it, then we'll see if we can get it cranked. And here, of course, you can see the fan belt. We got a new fan belt for it. And so this car has an alternator. They didn't come with an alternator, but we put an alternator on it because it works so much better. Keeps your lights a lot brighter and everything. So this does have an alternator, but when Ford built it in 28, it had a generator rather than an alternator. But the alternator, like I say, is a real good improvement. And here's where you put the oil in you raise the hood, and then you put oil in the car right here. It holds 4 quarts. Then, of course, this is the starter, and then you have your cable wire comes from the battery to the starter, and that's where all your juice comes from for the rest of the car. It runs from here to all the ignition and everything comes off of your starter, which is a manual starter. You mash it from the inside with your foot to make the starter work. And so you can turn it over with the starter without the switch on or with it on, of course. And of course the starter is not like a key starter like we used to in the modern stuff. It's you can mash that anytime with your foot and the starter will start going. And here's where you get all the electricity to run the car comes right off of the battery post right there, right off of the starter. This is an outlet, the water outlet, and there'll be a hose go from here to the bottom of the radiator. And when the water pump turning, it generate and spin the water through the motor out here and back to the bottom of the radiator. And then as the radiator goes, the heat rises, so it will go to the top and it starts to circulating. But that is the outlet for the water to come out of the motor and go to the radiator. And from this angle, you can see the head of the car is here, evident, and you can see that spark plugs, of course, is on the other side. And there you can see those brass wires again that I was talking about, how they stand out and they're unique. You'll never see them on another car other than a Model A Ford because they didn't. And of course we have the wire here. This is your ignition wire. When you turn your switch on, goes through this wire here and goes into your distributor and goes in through your points and makes it fire. But this is the head. It's all one piece, and your water pump is in this end of it. So now here we have these rods that hook to the steering column, and on the inside by the steering wheel, there's a lever that you can retard the spark in the distributor. When you're cranking it, you should have it up on low retarded spark, and as you get cranked and going down the road, you want to advance the timing. So, of course, all the modern cars does that automatic for you, but there's nothing automatic about a Model A. Everything is hand done. So that's how it works, and that's what that rod is for. And on the steering wheel, you'll see the lever that you have to move when you crank the car and when you're going down the road. A real important feature, you need that. And of course, the back end on the other side, you probably can't see it from the angle we're working on, but the transmission hooks right on there, and it's a 3-speed transmission and 1 reverse. So, of course, you got the clutch and pressure plate and stuff like that, but the transmission is a 3-speed transmission.
Now here you see we have the transmission. Now this is a 3-speed transmission, first, second, and high, and 1 reverse. And of course it's a pretty good little transmission. It works real good. And this is the emergency brake. You pull that and it applies the emergency brake in the back. Of course, and this is the clutch and all that is in here. And then you can take this door off and inspect it. And you can also grease your throwout bearing. But we put it together. These bolts here all had to be put in all together. This stayed in the car while we took the motor out. That part went out. And of course over here is your pedals. Got your brake pedal and your clutch. You have to match the clutch, change gear. So that all works as good as it could. And that, and of course the battery, I don't know if you can see the battery, it goes right here. And naturally we have a floorboard, covers all this up when we get through with it.
Now here we have a crank where you can stick it in right here and turn the motor over. It's a real hard job to do, but you can turn it over there. And with this rebuilt motor, it's too tough. We can't turn it. But you notice on the other end is a lug wrench. It goes both ways. You can use it to crank the car or tighten up your lug nuts. So that comes with the car. Of course, when you bought it, it would have one of them in it. So that's kind of necessary to have one of them. Now this motor's real tight. Can't hardly turn it over with that crank from the front because of it being tight. But as time goes on, it'll get loosened up and you'll be able to turn it if you had to. But most of the time, Model A hardly ever crank with a crank like that. If your battery was dead or some reason it wouldn't crank, you might push it off or something like that by hand. Works a whole lot better and quicker than trying to turn it with that crank. But that's what it's for. when we put the radiator on, of course, this is the holes here that the bolts that go in to hold the radiator, and we had to loosen up this here to get the radiator out from under that little cover there. So it's just, when we put it back down, there'll be a nut and bolt that'll go in that hole, and like it is over here, we didn't have to take one out to get it out. There's one there. So it'll look like that, we hope, when we get this back together. But we'll be doing that shortly. And right here, the front crossbar here is where the radiator will sit. It'll sit right here and over on this side. And then, of course, it has some rods that goes from here to steady the radiator. And, of course, when you have the hose going on here, that also steadies it. So it mounts right there. It's got springs so it can move a little bit. It has little springs on the nuts and bolts that you put on there, so it can move a little bit, so it won't be rigid for the car moving down the road and all. It's important that the radiator is able to move somewhat. But it'll go right on front, then the radiator shell will go on it, and then we'll be ready to take a ride. Well, and we had the motor rebuilt, and of course the cost of getting it rebuilt is in the neighborhood of $2,000 to get the motor rebuilt. That's new pistons and line reamed and bored. And then of course if we add the alternator, which is probably another $150 for that, then of course you got some odds and ends, new fan belt, new points, new plugs, new things that you need as you go along. So you're going to end up spending at least a minimum of $2,500 if you can do it all the work yourself. With the exception of having the motor rebuilt, we've done all the work ourselves, so we're able to do that. A lot of people not capable of doing it or don't want to do it, and so they had to pay somebody to do it, so they get a lot more money involved in the thing than we do. We try to do what we can for ourselves rather than pay somebody to do it.
are your angels.
Well, it's always interesting when people ask you how long you've been messing with these old cars, and in my case, I started getting an old car in 1964. Was the first old car I ever had. It was a Model T Ford, and it was a 1915 Model T Ford, and a real story goes along with it. But and most all of them do have a story, interesting to some, I'm sure. But this particular deal was a friend of mine that I knew a little bit. He had a 1914 Model T, really fixed up and really nice, and I really liked it. And I asked him where he come up with them old cars, and so he said, just get them here and there. This was long ago, 60 years ago or so. And anyway, it wasn't long, couple, 3 days, he called me and said, Robert, I got you an old car. And it happened to be a 1915 Model T Ford touring car. No paint on it whatsoever, had just rust all over, no upholstery, had the seats were just naked, and we had a croaker sack thrown over the seat. In a 1915 Model T, you had to crank out front, it has no starter. So he come up in that thing. And so anyway, long story short, I ended up buying it. He wanted $500 for it. And I told him there was no way that I could come up with $500. So anyway, he said if I could give him, I told him I had $200. He said, well, give me the two and pay me the rest when you can. So I had to go to the bank and borrow $300 to pay him off. And so that's why I got my first car and my first car note all at the same time. I was paying $26 a month back on that $300 I had to borrow. But these old cars, they come in a lot of different ways, and none of them hadn't got a story behind it. And of course the Model A is notorious for stories, because the people just back in the days when they was running around in them, they just kept them going as long as they would go. They would drive it. If they had to push it off to crank it or what, especially during the Depression and hard times, people just had to do what they had to do, and they just wore them out. But the very few of them you see today was like that, left like that. Somebody created it to get it into shape it's in when you see it on the TV and in car shows. So it's interesting, and it's real exciting that you're able to bring them back to life, and that's what we enjoy doing.
And you know, we've been working on this old Model A here for quite a while with a new motor and all, and we've now got it in, and we're ready to see if it will crank and run. So if it does, we're going to crank and drive it out of this garage and take it for a little spin.